Hello and welcome to the Power Your Advice podcast. The Power Your Advice podcast is designed to bring financial advisors new ideas, why those ideas should be considered, and how to implement them into your business. This podcast is brought to you by Advisorpedia, the best place for advisors to grow their minds and businesses. And now, please join your host, Doug Heikkinen.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we welcome Mike Elsarini, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for Kingswood Group US and the Chief Compliance Officer and Head of Operations for Kingswood Capital Partners and Kingswood Wealth Advisors. He has over 12 years of industry experience. Mike also served as in the back office in sales and compliance roles at TD Ameritrade, AXA, and most recently, Cuso Financial Services, where he was a regulatory specialist serving as the firm's Department of Labor designee. And my favorite part, he's a fellow Wolverine. Welcome, Mike. So let's start out with how does one both pick financial services and compliance? It's not something that you're running around the backyard as a kid plotting that course.
No, definitely not. But I've been in or around the industry basically all my life. My father was in insurance, and I got my insurance licenses as soon as I was legally able. So I'd been around the industry for a long time, and I'd seen it from every angle. And as I worked in different roles, I started to admire a specific individual in my career who worked in compliance, and that kind of he became a mentor and kind of set me on my path in the compliance industry.
So not only did you choose this profession, but you're at Kingswood US, a company with a very complex compliance tree. You have a BD, RIAs, reps using your platform and services, not to mention the partnership and product sets. How do you stay organized?
Well, it's definitely a challenge. As you mentioned, we are a total currently of 4 organizations. That's 2 RIAs and 2 BDs. When we first merged the 2 BD RIA entities, there was some overlap. There was some gaps in between. And I think over the last year and a half, and from a compliance point of view, the focus has been to consolidate processes, so that although it may look to the outside as if it's 4 organizations, internally we are able to kind of view them as one.
That's great. So let's start out with some broader compliance questions. What's the state of compliance in financial services? Does everybody understand what's going on?
I don't think even regulators fully understand what's going on. It's the breadth of compliance and regulation has become enormous, and I think that's why it's become even more important than ever to put an emphasis on compliance, because from one broker to another, from one advisor to another, and I'm sure there's value propositions, between individuals, but without the backing of a compliance team who can navigate the regulatory framework, then you simply will be denied market access by regulators. So we're at a point now where the machine has become so complex that kind of owner-operator model doesn't really work. And people who maybe wanted to go off on their own in the RA space or BD space have decided that they need to be a part of a team with a strong compliance department. So it's strengthened the case for attaching yourself to an organization that has in-house compliance strength.
I have to get this through compliance. Mm-hmm. Those 7 words are said over and over and over again. So it sounds like that is getting tougher, or is it getting easier?
Well, it's becoming more defined, I would say, which can be viewed as easier in the sense that we're getting a better understanding of what regulators are looking for from us. But that being said, what they are looking for is becoming more and more, which is okay, because ultimately, when the intentions of the advisors are good and the intentions of organizations are good, you really have nothing to worry about if you're following the rules. And so, as long as we have clear guidance, then we really don't mind an environment where regulation is increasing. Not too much, but to the extent that we can implement it's not a problem.
I've seen a few companies try to start and automate the compliance process to make it easier for everybody. Is there too much nuance involved in compliance for this to be effective?
Well, I think there's a place for automation in that, workflows, technology that can maybe automatically spit out things like exception reports. I think that's become indispensable. The industry couldn't function without it now. There was a time where people reviewed trade blotters, printed them out and looked at them with magnifying glasses to point out, errant trades or things that may have stood out. And you can imagine the amount of human error that might have been involved in a process like that. So, automating it to an extent is necessary. And so as regulations increase, and the labor force for compliance is not necessarily growing so fast, the only thing that will keep us up is some form of automation.
Let's talk Reg BI. What is it? Who does it affect? And who does it help?
Well, ultimately, it helps the consumer, but I think when we look at the Department of Labor rule that was overturned and kind of replaced by Reg BI, it was also a win for the industry, and both kind of achieving the same thing, but one, Reg BI, having more realistic and attainable goals. So what it is essentially is a rule that totally erases the line between the fiduciary RIA side of the business and the suitability standard that was applied on the BD side of the business. And so now both are expected to act as fiduciaries, and you're expected to act in the client's best interest. Now, best interest is still kind of a nebulous term, and it can be better defined. But I think that over the years, it'll ultimately be a good thing for clients and for the investing public.
Does it better define what's going to be allowed and what's not?
No, unfortunately, the term best interest is vague, but as we're seeing it applied, it's becoming clearer to us. So the letter of the rule, as opposed to the Department of Labor rule, which really cut off certain forms of business and kind of was looked at as apocalyptic for a lot of transactional business. This it doesn't necessarily allow or forbid anything that was allowed in the past. It just puts it within the framework of the client's best interest.
So do we know exactly what the regulators are looking for?
I think what they're looking for is first for us to identify our conflicts of interest. That was really the first phase of it. And they want firms to start thinking in terms of conflicts of interest. Like if I'm making a recommendation and I am being compensated more or less for that recommendation based on other products in the universe of products that are available, that creates a conflict of interest that is not necessarily prohibited, but needs to be addressed. And so that's the first phase of Reg BI, and the second part or part 1B would be notifying the client of those conflicts. So the conflicts are out there. We need to notify the clients of those conflicts, and it really allows the representatives, the organizations, broker-dealers, and RIAs to start thinking in terms of when I'm being compensated, it creates an inherent conflict that can be overcome. We just need to put it all out there.
Do you think for a firm like Kingswood and others like this, that training is going to have to be an important factor? Because if you're a rep working on the field, how are you supposed to know all this stuff?
Absolutely. And a rep is not going to be a walking encyclopedia of rules and regulations. So it has to be common sense. And there has to be a common sense element to our training as well. We need to show real world examples of what's right and wrong. And so that's going to be the kind of the cornerstone of our training going forward is really showing examples now. We've made our disclosures, we've made delivery of all the forms, and kind of done the formal part of Reg BI, which is easy enough. But now we need to show you real world examples of how this may or may not be in the client's best interest, or and things like that.
Let's get RIA specific. What's the landscape and what's changing?
Well, I think the RIA space, there will continue to be a movement of funds from the BD side to the RIA side, but I think there's been a general deceleration of that migration. And I think part of that is because of Reg BI, and part of it is because there are so many attractive products that are out there for transactional business. So the doomsday scenario maybe will still happen sometime down the line, where the BD transactional type business is no longer viable. But in the short term, it looks like the RIA migration to RIA has slowed down a bit, because the ability for an RIA to say, I'm the only fiduciary out there, and I'm the only individual or organization that's being held to a fiduciary standard, that's no longer the case, and so that advantage is gone. But I still think it generally makes sense for 90% of representatives and advisors to have most of their money being run through annual management RIA traditionally.
Talk to me about active effort. This is a new thing that they're looking at, and what does it mean, and how are advisors supposed to think about this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they essentially want to see you earn your fee. There's and that doesn't necessarily mean picking stocks. It doesn't necessarily mean managing a portfolio in the same way a hedge fund would. In fact, that can often be pretty detrimental to a client. But what they do want to see is that you're actively meeting with your clients, that you're keeping a pulse on their needs and objectives, and that you're adjusting their portfolios accordingly. So it's not they don't necessarily need to see you picking the right stocks all the time, or getting super sophisticated with your strategies. What they do want to see is contact with the client, the end client.
They're also much more interested in the movement of money. Why so?
Well, they've always been interested, because there's this huge migration, and they want to make sure that as money moves, as this massive amount of money moves from what might have been invested in mutual funds or load products or alternatives or whatever, is moving in a way that's not detrimental to the client, so that so advisors are not double dipping. They're not taking clients out of a product who may have already paid their load but hasn't received the benefit of the load yet, and straight into an advisory program that's going to charge them a percentage no matter what. So although it seems to be a no-brainer to move your money over to the RIA, you do have to be cognizant of the fact that it's not always appropriate. And the timing of the movement of money needs to be, in the client's best interest.
Everything they're doing is to protect the end investor, and so much of what regulators are trying to do that. How can advisors communicate that to their clients other than saying, I'm a fiduciary, FinServ speak?
Yeah, I think a representative just being thoughtful and going through the motions, so to speak, of making sure that they're offering them or at least going over a number of options and things that are now becoming codified and a part of the regulatory landscape. If you actually do those things, rather than telling them I'm a fiduciary, it shows the client that you're being thoughtful and that you're thinking of them, and whether they understand or not that you have to. The more you adhere to that, the better advisor you'll be.
Mike, this has been great. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
For more information or to contact Mike, please contact kingswoodus.com. Please follow us for all the latest updates on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, all at Advisorpedia. For everyone at Advisorpedia, our producer Jakey Beard, and the Power Your Advice podcast team, this is Doug Heikkinen.